Everyone who loved you and watched you lose someone has said some version of it. You need to start over. You need to let yourself begin again. They mean well. They say it the way people say things when they are desperate for the pain to stop. Yours or their own discomfort, which they see reflected in your face. But there is a problem with that instruction. A deep, structural, physics-level problem. The brain does not begin again. It cannot. Not because it is weak, or because you are holding on too tightly, or because grief has fractured something that another season will repair. The brain cannot start over because of the second law of thermodynamics, because of what entropy actually means at the level of neural tissue and synaptic architecture. And once you understand what the physics says about that, not as metaphor, not as consolation, but as mechanism, the guilt that accumulates around not starting over transforms into something else entirely. In the 1970s, a young neuroscientist named Carl Friston was working on what would become the most comprehensive theory of brain function proposed in the last half-century. Friston, working at University College London and the Wellcome Centre for Human Neuroimaging, proposed something radical, that the brain's primary job is not to perceive the world, it is to minimise surprise. He called it the free energy principle. Your brain at every waking moment is generating predictions about what it will sense next. The pressure of your body against the chair, the temperature of the air at your skin, the sound pattern your auditory cortex expects from the room around you. When reality matches the prediction, the brain expends almost nothing. When reality violates the prediction, the brain fires a prediction error signal. Cortical prediction error. It is metabolically expensive, neurologically disruptive, and, sustained across time, physiologically destabilizing in ways that are now measurable in blood and tissue. Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett at Northeastern University extended Friston's model into the body itself. Her work, published across Nature Reviews, Neuroscience and Psychological Science, demonstrates that the brain doesn't only predict what is coming from outside, it predicts your own heartbeat, your blood glucose curve, your cortisol output across the day. The interior landscape of the body is also a prediction problem the brain is solving continuously below the threshold of awareness. Here is where grief enters, not as a feeling first, but as a cascade of broken predictions. The person you lost was not simply someone you cared about. They were woven into thousands of predictions your brain was running every hour of every day. The timing of a door, the particular cadence of footsteps in a hallway, the weight and warmth of a body in a shared bed, the forward-facing simulations your nervous system was running about tomorrow, and the day after, and 10 years from now, they were neurologically part of the infrastructure through which your brain understood what was going to happen next. Losing them does not produce sadness first, it produces a prediction storm, an avalanche of error signals cascading simultaneously across every predictive layer of the nervous system. That is clinically confirmed. What follows from it, the structural mechanisms of why the brain resists dismantling what it built, is mechanistically plausible, grounded in the evidence, and the distinction will stay clear throughout. Every relationship you had with the person who died was encoded in your nervous system through a process called long-term potentiation, among the most well-established findings in modern neuroscience, first confirmed by Timothy Bliss and Terje Lomo in 1973. When two neurons fire together repeatedly, the synaptic connection between them is physically strengthened. The receptor sites multiply. The dendritic spines, the tiny branching receivers at the tip of each neuron, grow thicker and more numerous in proportion to the frequency and emotional intensity of the activating experience. The pathway becomes preferential. Signals flow through it faster, more automatically, with less metabolic effort. What this means across years and decades of shared life is that your brain physically reshaped itself around the person you lost. Not in a poetic sense. The tissue changed. The most important relationship you had produced the deepest, most stable, most thermodynamically efficient neural structures in your brain. This is what physicists and neuroscientists alike call a low entropy state. It is organized, it is optimized. A system that has moved, through the investment of enormous time and energy, into a configuration that now requires almost no energy to maintain. A groove so deep and well-worn that cognition flows through it without effort. Losing that person does not erase those structures. This is the mechanism that the phrase "start over" misunderstands at its root. The architecture is still there, the synaptic paths are still weighted, the prediction circuits are still firing, but now they are firing into absence, into the expectation of a face that does not appear, a voice that does not arrive, a presence the brain is still allocating metabolic resources to simulate, because no signal has arrived to tell the prediction system that the signal will never come again. Dr. Mary Frances O'Connor at the University of Arizona has spent more than a decade mapping this using functional magnetic resonance imaging. Her research, published in journals including Cerebral Cortex, shows that bereaved individuals demonstrate persistent activation in the nucleus accumbens, the brain's reward anticipation circuit, when encountering cues associated with the deceased. The brain is not simply replaying memory, it is anticipating. It is generating forward predictions that cannot resolve. The reward circuit fires, expects the reward, and receives nothing. This is not grief as emotion. This is grief as a broken prediction loop running on hardware that still expects the signal. Now consider the default mode network, the constellation of brain regions including the medial prefrontal cortex, posterior cingulate cortex, angular gyrus, and hippocampus. That activates when the brain is at rest, when you stop concentrating on a task, when you sit quietly, when you lie in bed waiting for sleep. This network comes online with full metabolic intensity. Research from Princeton's Neuroscience Institute and the Human Connectome Project has established that it is not idling. It is doing its most complex social work, simulating other minds, running computational models of the people closest to you, their intentions, their likely responses, and who is the primary subject of those simulations for someone in an intimate, long-term relationship. The person they know most deeply, which means that when you are doing nothing, resting, distracting yourself, attempting to start over, your brain's most metabolically active resting state network is running a simulation of someone who is no longer there. Not by grief, by architecture. By the predictive imperative, the network cannot switch off because no formal signal has arrived to update the model. This is why grief is exhausting in a way that differs structurally from other psychological pain. The metabolic cost of sustained prediction error is measurable. Cortisol dysregulation, immune suppression, disruption of the glymphatic waste clearance system during sleep. Grief is a thermodynamic event. The body keeps the account. What the instruction to start over is actually asking of your brain is thermodynamically equivalent to asking a river to run uphill. You are asking the neural system to dismantle its most optimized, lowest energy, most deeply consolidated structures, and return organized complexity, years of synaptic reinforcement, to an undifferentiated state. That is not starting over. That is the active production of entropy. And entropy production is the most metabolically costly thing a thermodynamic system can do. The brain resists it the way all physical systems resist a forced increase in disorder, with inertia, with friction, with what we experience, subjectively, as the incapacity to move. What makes this harder is a question that most people never think to ask. Why does the brain register this loss as a threat rather than simply an absence? Why does the system not go quiet, rather than firing continuously into the void? That question has an answer, and the answer changes something fundamental about how this whole mechanism is understood. If you want to trace the evidence for how the structures built around a person may be more permanent than we are typically told, and what that permanence actually means. What Feynman knew about grief maps the complete framework. The link is in the description and pinned comment. Here is where it becomes strange in a way the popular account of grief almost never reaches. When you try to force the reset, when you suppress the prediction loops, avoid the cues, insist to your own nervous system that the restructuring must happen faster, the brain does not cooperate. It escalates. Research from the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, including work by neuroscientist Johan Lundström on olfactory memory suppression, documents a consistent paradox. Deliberate suppression of a memory-associated cue produces increased subsequent activation of the associated neural circuit. The harder you try not to think about them, the more metabolic resources the brain allocates to the very network you are attempting to quiet. This is not weakness. This is what happens when a thermodynamic system is asked to perform a function that violates its own operating principles. The system produces more entropy, resisting the forced reset, than it would running the natural reorganization process. There is another structure running in parallel that rarely enters lay conversations about grief. The hippocampus does not store memories as discrete files, it encodes events as locations in a cognitive geography. A map of where things happened, when they happened, and who was present. The work of Dr. John O'Keefe at University College London, awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 2014, established that the hippocampus constructs cognitive maps from place cells and grid cells that encode position within an experienced world. The person you lost is not stored in your brain as a photograph. They are encoded as a cluster of locations, distributed across every place you shared, every sequence of time in which they were present. Grief is, in a neurologically literal sense, geographical. You do not simply remember them, you encounter them in space, in the kitchen where they stood, on the side of the bed where they slept. Not because you are failing to move forward, but because the hippocampal map is still intact. The map is not the territory. But the territory is gone, and the map remains, and the brain navigating by the map keeps arriving at coordinates that are now differently occupied. Memory reconsolidation adds a further layer. Every time a memory is consciously accessed, it enters a brief state of lability, temporarily open to modification before it is re-encoded. This is clinically confirmed. What it means for grief is that the architecture does not persist unchanged indefinitely. Every encounter with a grief cue is an opportunity for the system to incorporate new contextual information, not to erase, to rewrite slowly with a revised set of expected conditions. Researchers including O'Connor and Dr. George Bonanno at Columbia University's Teachers College call this contextual updating. The map is not reset, it is redrawn incrementally to include absence as a known feature of the landscape, rather than an unexpected gap. The distinction between resetting and redrawing, between erasure and transformation, is the distinction that changes everything about how this mechanism is understood. The companion guide is in the pinned comment below, only while this video is up. Richard Feynman lectured on entropy with the urgency of someone who considered it the most important mystery in physics. In the Feynman Lectures on Physics, delivered at Caltech across 1961 and 1962, he returns repeatedly to the second law of thermodynamics. Not because it is complex, but because it is the only physical law that gives time its direction. Every other fundamental equation, Newton's laws, Maxwell's equations, even the Schrödinger equation, is time reversible. Run the mathematics backward, and the physics still holds. Only entropy is asymmetric. Entropy increases. Disorder grows. And that asymmetry is why the past is fixed and the future is open. The arrow of time is the arrow of entropy, and Feynman insisted this was not a footnote to physics, but its deepest structural fact. Here is what that means for grief, stated without softening. The neural architecture built around the person you lost is a product of that arrow. It was assembled by time through the accumulation of shared experience, through the thermodynamic ratchet of long-term potentiation locking each connection deeper than the one before it. That structure moved in one direction, toward order, toward complexity, toward the specific and irreplaceable configuration of a brain that had incorporated another person into its predictive infrastructure over the course of years. Reversing that process, returning to a state before the structure existed, would require running entropy backward, which the physics does not permit, not as metaphor, as constraint. But Feynman understood something about entropy that the popular account almost always misses. He understood that the dissolution of one organized structure is not the end of organization. It is the raw material from which new organization emerges. A star exhausts its fuel and collapses. The explosion scatters atoms forged in the stellar core across light years of space. Those atoms seed a nebula that condenses into new stars containing elements. The original never held. Entropy does not eliminate order. It transforms it. This is not offered as consolation. It is a mechanistic description of what the data suggest actually happens in the grieving brain over time. The low entropy architecture, built around the person you lost, does not dissolve into nothing. It reorganizes. The default mode simulations become less metabolically urgent. Not because the person is being forgotten, but because the prediction system has incorporated their absence as a known variable rather than an ongoing error. The hippocampal map is redrawn, not erased. The geography now includes the empty coordinates as locations with meaning rather than locations with unresolved expectation. The river does not run uphill. But it finds new channels. Feynman wrote his letter to Arlene in the autumn of 1946. 16 months after she died of tuberculosis at the age of 25, while he was still at Los Alamos, having arrived at the hospital too late to be with her at the end. He told her he loved her in the present tense, and then he added a postscript, in that precise and unadorned way he had. Please excuse my not mailing this, but Adisonakaseki. But I don't know your new address. He kept the letter, he sealed it. He never sent it, because there was nowhere to send it. It was found in his personal archives 43 years later, only after his own death in 1988. Still sealed, still organised, still carrying information in the structure of the words on the page. He had organised language into a specific, low-entropy structure addressed to someone who was not there to receive it. That is an entropy-defying act. Not because entropy can be defeated, but because the act of organising, of building structure in the presence of dissolution, is what a mind does, what it cannot stop doing, even when there is no destination for what it has built, even when the address is unknown, if what you followed today mattered to you. If tracing this through the physics and the neuroscience reached something, I want to say thank you, directly. You are the reason this channel exists. YouTube removed our ad monetization, and even after that, they continue running ads on our videos, collecting that revenue while we receive nothing. We tried to remove the ads so they wouldn't interrupt you. The machine kept them running. So we created What Feynman Knew About Grief. Not as a business move, as a way to keep this information reaching more people, without depending on a system that is actively working against us. If what you found here mattered to you, the link is in the description and pinned in the comments. That is how this channel stays alive. If you believe this information should keep spreading, the link is below. That is how we keep going. Only while this video is running, just as Feynman organised language into a letter that had nowhere to go and sent it into the silence anyway, this channel keeps organising the evidence and sending it forward. The address may be uncertain. We keep writing. The architecture does not dissolve. The map is still there, the coordinates are still marked. The name is still written at the location where everything happened. And the brain, that extraordinary, exhausted, entropy-minimizing machine, continues navigating by it, not backward to some imagined clean beginning. Forward, carrying everything the second law says it cannot erase, through new channels carved by the same force that closed the old ones, toward a configuration that did not exist before the loss made it necessary.